your speaker for this session is Ben Gittis, the Director of Standards of the European Observatoire for Sport Employment, EOSE. Ben has worked in vocational education and training in sport for the last 12 years. Ben's main experience and expertise is in developing competence frameworks, linking qualifications to the labour market and developing professional recognition schemes. Ben has led the technical development of standards for many occupations within sport and active leisure. Ben leads on international partnerships and has developed standards and qualifications in countries including Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Ben acts as Technical Director for the Register of Exercise Professionals in the UAE.
Presentations. So introducing EOSE, we're a not-for-profit organisation been based in France since 2002, and we're a European membership organisation with contacts worldwide, and we focus on education and employment in sport. So our members are many universities from across Europe, but also some sports ministries, sports councils, research institutes, different organisations who have an interest at the national level and European level in education and employment. And we have a member in 25 European Union countries. There's only 3 countries now that we're missing, where there's no members so far. And our area of knowledge and expertise, sport education, particularly matching sport education to employment and the labour market, workforce development, vocational education and training, and European policies and initiatives. And indeed, most of our work comes through European projects. So we're a partner in this project, but we also often run many of our own projects as the coordinator and include partners from right across Europe, working across all areas of the sports sector on education and vocational education and employment related projects. Our mission is to facilitate and support the development of the sport sector workforce to ensure people working and volunteering have the right skills to perform and enable the sector to fulfill its potential as social, health and economic driver. So we don't talk about sport just for the sake of sport. We look at the potential sport can have on to have social impact, to increase the health of the population, and is good for the economy. So the structure of our session today, we're going to talk about a project called S2A Sport, which is in the area of sport administration. And then I'm going to hand over to Jeff for the second 2 presentations. Jeff's going to look at statistics and brand new statistics on the size and characteristics of the sport labour market, bringing that right up to date to include some findings from 2020 and initial impact of COVID-19 on the sports workforce. And also the findings from a project called ESSA Sport. That's the European Sector Skills Alliance project, when the main findings from a very large European employer survey and the recommendations from that project. So these are 2 examples of current work and previous work, and as Steve says, that have set the scene and have informed the new project application and can be used as a reference point in the work that we will do in this new project. So the S2A Sport project, S2A Sport Administration, was its full acronym, and its full title was From Strategy to Action. So you can see what we've done there, strategy to action, that's where the S2A came from. And it's about supporting the professionalisation of sport organisations through the definition of work-based competences and the development of fit-for-purpose training for sport administrators. It was funded through Erasmus+, through the French agency, and it took place from 2015 to 2018 with 12 partners from 10 countries. And the website is still live, where all the results and reports and standards are still there at s2a-sport.eu.
Ben, before you go any further, sorry Ben,
sure.
Steve Osborne, just before you go any further, the slides aren't progressing on. So if you've launched your PowerPoint, they're not showing at the moment.
Can you try presentation mode?
What's
they're moving now. I think it's
Yeah, I was in presentation mode and I was clicking through, but it wasn't moving the slide. So if it's okay with you and colleagues, I'll do it like this.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, and I'll just make that a little bigger, and that's fine. So that's the slide I just had about the S2A project, and moving on to this one, where we had a definition of sport administration, which embraces the processes and activities of running a sport organisation, operating within the sector at all levels, includes a variety of tasks across a wide range of functions in accordance with the purpose and direction of the organisation, and sport administration functions are implemented by all those, paid and unpaid, who work to ensure the effective running of a sport organisation. And it's perhaps even more clear if I show the type of organisations we included as sport administration organisations: sport ministries, European and international federations, national governing bodies, national federations, sports councils, Olympic committees, sports confederations, sports associations, professional bodies, grassroots organisations, sports bodies, and sports clubs. So these are the type of organisations we included under sport administration. So you could say that as a subset or a subset of sport management overall, because we did not include managing sports facilities, so managing stadiums or swimming pools or leisure centres. We didn't include that in our definition and standards of sport administration. And I'm sure with so many academics we could talk about these definitions for several hours, but that's what we included as sport administration for this project: people who run processes and projects within sport organisations. Within the project, we implemented something we've used for many years at EOSE called the 7-step model for lifelong learning in sport and physical activity. This is a model that we've developed using national and European principles of vocational education and good practice. And it's about understanding the realities and changes of the labour market, what's actually happening on the ground out in the industry, and matching education and training to the needs of the labour market. And by education and training, that could be at university level, or it could be down to smaller training providers or continuing professional development courses. So any type of education or vocational education, we should say, should match the realities and the needs of the labour market. And it's about equipping the workforce, and that's paid and unpaid, with the right skills and the skills for them to succeed and progress in the industry. And it also promotes a collaboration on skills, both across countries and across the whole of Europe and beyond, but also different types of organisation: universities, training providers, ministries, sports councils, federations, employers, all working together on a shared understanding of competencies and skills and education. So the 7-step model starts with research. So hopefully we can bring some of our experience to this project in research, and we call it labour market intelligence, and trying to understand the labour market and what happens in employment. We then develop an occupational map and occupational descriptors, talking about the size of the sector and its characteristics and all of the main jobs and occupations. We then develop occupational standards using a process of functional analysis, which I'll talk about in a second. And steps 1 to 5 are all about the industry, defining the industry, understanding the industry, defining competences needed for the workplace. Steps 6 and 7 are about education, where we flip over to present all of that information and competencies and standards and information about the sector to the education community, so they can use that as a benchmark to make relevant and fit for purpose education programs. So the research phase of the S2A project, we wanted to look at workforce and skills issues in sport administration, and we started off with desk research, finding out what was already available online and through our partners at the national and European level. We then developed a detailed research protocol which focused on a survey of sport organisations. Through our partners, we were able to translate this into 6 languages and promote the survey through our partners, particularly at the national level, but also at the European and even worldwide level. And we received 351 responses from 12 countries, with a large proportion of sport federations, sports clubs, other sports bodies at the national and regional level. And this was useful to gather views and data on skills requirements and trends and challenges in employment. So the full report is available online. Very happy to share that with you. But we listed some skills and competencies and attributes and asked the employers to rank them in their level of importance. And for the employers who responded, some of the most important were seen as developing strategic direction and working with a board to develop strategy, organizational performance, implementing operational plans, good governance scored very highly, and developing and managing projects. And we also gathered their views on trends and tendencies in the industry, where they score statements that scored very highly were things like sport organizations have become more professional in recent years, demands from governments on sport and sport organizations are increasing, and in the future, the employers thought there would be a demand for a better qualified workforce as these demands increase. We also developed something called occupational standards. Sometimes these are called professional standards or a competency framework. And these are really something that describe what people need to be able to do to be effective in their role in employment. So it covers competencies under headings of performance criteria, what people need to do, and knowledge, what people need to know to be effective in their job. We use a process called functional analysis. And we work through both expert groups using desk research and new research to gain an understanding of skills and competencies needed in the industry. And then once we produce these standards, quite detailed descriptions of the competence needed in employment, they can be used by employers to benchmark their workforce or to develop job descriptions or performance job descriptions, performance processes and appraisal systems for their employees. So there's a range of uses for employers, and also used by education, where they can be used as a benchmark of good practice in employment and the standards that are needed by sports graduates if they're going to hit the ground running and work well in the sector when they start employment. And education providers can match their courses to the standards. And Steve, I'll talk about the standards in a second, but do you want to mention any of the work you've done on mapping an educational program to standards?
Yeah, no, as part of the process of writing the bid, in parallel, I was working with colleagues in an institutional context, revalidating our programs, and Liz Lewis, who I've mentioned already today, is the program director for our undergraduate sports management program, and we wanted to make sure that in redesigning our degree, we were looking at a constructive alignment process, and you'll hear from Simspa and Colin later on today. We took the UK standards and we took this framework and we mapped that into our module design and program and assessment as part of a constructive alignment process. It was really, really valuable because we're trying to cover in that sports management degree all of the sort of broader aspects of the sports industry, knowing that some of our students will be drawn towards sports administration or events management or community settings, sports for development. So certainly at undergrad, we felt this was vital in terms of being able to design our modules and knowing that using this framework that employers had been engaged. And it was a big part of our recent validation activities. We also invited 60 employers onto site, but to work with our colleagues and program teams. But this framework was really powerful in terms of sitting there and working with our external examiners and making sort of in terms of being comfortable and confident that what we were including in our indicative content was well evidenced and we had feedback. So it really helped shape that process from our point of view.
Great, thanks. Yeah, it's really great to see results of a project being used, and we've got several examples of universities and institutions benchmarking their programs against the standards that we produced in this project. So the standards come under different key areas and sub areas. So the first one was strategic direction, and under the areas of vision and direction and good governance, the standards for supporting strategic development, working effectively with a board, facilitating and implementing principles of good governance, and ensuring compliance with regulations. And each of these titles has a detailed 2 or 3 page document of detail of performance criteria and knowledge covering the detail of the competence that individuals need to meet. Second area is around people and human resources, teams and individuals, we developed standards around implementing a workforce strategy, managing your workforce, involving and supporting volunteers in sport, providing leadership, and managing your own and others' professional development. Also, resources was another key area under financial and physical and technical resources, managing finance in your area, applying for external funding, managing physical resources, and overseeing equipment and facilities. All competencies that ranked highly with the employers when we spoke to them and when we did the desk research and the new primary research activities. Operations, looking at business processes in marketing, customer service and communication, developing and reviewing operational plans, running projects, meetings, club management, developing sports clubs, marketing and communication activities. So again, detailed standards outlining the standard of performance to perform some of these tasks in work. And finally, a whole area on sport processes and activities, looking at policies and rules for sport and implementing policies for inclusion and widening the participation base in sport, supporting ethics and regulations, influencing sport policy and decisions, and through to organising events, competitions, developing an organisation's membership, and increasing participation in sport. So real things that are important specifically to sport organisations, as well as some of the other broader competences that you would see in any type of management. So that's all available, and we're happy to input that into the project if it's useful. And we also developed a training handbook where we provided advice on how you could turn these standards into training courses, particularly focusing on continuing professional development courses, but also any type of training, looking at accreditation, qualifications frameworks, how to develop resources, types of tutors, etc. And we developed some sample modules under that match to the standards, some sample learning outcomes and indicative content for some of these areas of management and involving volunteers, good governance, etc. We also ran a pilot training course in Finland over 5 days, where we brought 40 people from across Europe for a program in sport administration, very successful project for young managers in the first or second job, usually aged kind of 20 to 30. We brought people together to do 5 topics over 5 days and a range of social and academic activities as a pilot program in the project. So that was really the S2A project, but we also always look at the legacy of projects. And this is something we should plan in this new project, even from the beginning in our first meeting right now, what's going to happen after the project. So although the S2A project finished in 2018, we applied for a new project, which is currently happening this year, called S2A Sport Mobility, working with some of the partners who are also on this project, working with and some of the colleagues around the table. But also working outside Europe with some Olympic committees and university from the Western Balkans, from Montenegro, Albania, Kosovo, and North Macedonia. And we're going to, in this new project, give 40 sport administrators the chance to take part in a week of training in 3 different countries, in Albania, Montenegro, and North Macedonia, and take part in a 4 days national study visit. So we're keeping the momentum, still developing sport administrators, linking back to the first project. Unfortunately, this new project is very much impacted by COVID-19 and no activity has happened yet, but hopefully later this year, we might be able to implement some of these activities. So it's really keeping an eye from the start, what future project can be done, what legacy can come from the original project. So some of the lessons we can learn, make full use of the partners in the networks. Steve's already talked about this today, but it'll be very important for us all to be fully involved and involve our networks at the national and European level for all communication and dissemination. We'll work with Steve and all colleagues to make sure there's a solid research protocol, that we know exactly what we want to find out and why, and we don't make it too broad or too difficult. But it's very clear, the protocol for the survey and the research that we're going to do in the project. Build on existing research findings and use existing definitions and standards and frameworks. Steve's already talked about that, but certainly a lesson we would promote as well. And like I say, focus on impact and sustainability and legacy of the project. How is it going to be used, not just during the project, but after it finishes?